Apple, $3 trillion. Amazon, $1.7 trillion. Microsoft, $3 trillion. Add them all up, and it is still not even half. Half of what? Of a company you have probably never heard of. A company founded in 1602. A company with its own army of 10,000 soldiers. A company with the legal right to declare war. Peak valuation, $8.3 trillion in today's money. But here is the truth they do not teach you in business school. The VOC, the Dutch East India Company, was not rich because they sold products. They were rich because they sold violence. They invented the stock market, the IPO, the corporation as we know it, and they used all of it to build the most profitable killing machine in history. What happens when a corporation gets more powerful than countries? When shareholders vote on invasions? When quarterly earnings are enforced at gunpoint? We worry about big tech today. Amazon's monopoly, Facebook's data, Google's control. But the VOC? They did not lobby governments. They did not influence elections. They were the government. In half of Asia, this is the story of the company that invented modern capitalism and left a body count in the millions. Welcome to the anatomy of a monster. Back to 1580. If you were Dutch, you were living a nightmare. The Spanish Empire just swallowed Portugal. Overnight, they control South America, the Philippines, and the entire Asian spice route. And you? The tiny Dutch Republic. Underwater, desperately fighting for independence. And your enemy just doubled in size. The Spanish had the fleets, the mercenaries, and the infinite silver mines. You could not win a traditional war. So, the Dutch elite made a decision. If we cannot beat them with gunpowder, we will beat them with a balance sheet. March 20th, 1602. The Dutch government issues a charter unlike anything in history. Not to a king, not to the nobility, but to a company, the VOC. The charter gave the VOC the monopoly on Asian trade, the right to build forts, the right to sign foreign treaties, and the most insane part, the right to declare war. A private company legally allowed to declare war. Imagine if Amazon had the legal right to invade sovereign nations to protect its supply chain. That was the VOC. But how do you fund this war machine? Building fleets, hiring mercenaries, establishing global trade routes. No single family or king was rich enough. So, they tried something crazy. August 1602, the VOC opened its books to the public. For the first time in history, ordinary citizens could buy permanent ownership in this mega corporation. It was the first IPO in human history. Money flooded in. Over 1,000 people, from bakers and tailors to shopkeepers, raised 6.5 million guilders, roughly $120 million today, in just a few months. But the real monster woke up in the next step. Jan sells his shares to Peter. Peter sells to Maria. Maria sells to Klaus. The VOC did not care. They already had the money. The ships were already built. People suddenly realized, this piece of paper is a currency in itself. It could be traded, bet upon, speculated. Within months, merchants were gathering at the Oudebrug Bridge in Amsterdam to trade VOC shares. That was the birth of the Amsterdam Stock Exchange. And driven by greed, they did not just buy and hold. They invented short selling, betting the stock would crash. Futures, contracts, buying at a set price in the future. Margin trading, borrowing money to gamble bigger. Every tool Wall Street uses today, every financial derivative that triggered the 2008 global financial crisis, they were all invented in 17th century Amsterdam to trade a single stock. But their most dangerous invention? Limited liability. Before the VOC, if a ship you invested in sank, creditors would seize your house. You were ruined. The VOC changed the rules. If the company fails, You only lose what you put in. Your home is safe. But here is the terrifying part. It also created moral limited liability. For the first time, shareholders could reap the profits without bearing the legal or moral responsibility for what the company did. If the VOC slaughtered an entire island for spices, the shareholders' hands remained clean. It was legalized apathy. Think about this. In less than a year, the Dutch invented the joint stock company, the IPO, the stock exchange, financial derivatives. Every publicly traded company today, Apple, Google, Tesla, is running on the source code written by the VOC. The VOC did not just create a company, they created the architecture of modern capitalism. But this machine needed a backer, a royal family with no kingdom, no gold mines, no land to rule. A family that had already realized the ultimate truth of the new era. You do not need a crown to rule. You just need to own the market. To understand the VOC's power, you have to understand the product. Forget gold. Forget silver. The ultimate asset of the 17th century was spice. Specifically, nutmeg. Back then, nutmeg was not just for cooking. It was the uranium of the era. The only known cure for the Black Plague. It grew in only one place on Earth, a tiny, isolated archipelago called the Banda Islands. The math was simple, but mind-blowing. Buy a sack of nutmeg from the natives for a few pennies, survive the ocean, and sell it in Amsterdam for the price of a house. A 60,000% profit margin. But high margins attract competition. The English wanted in. The Portuguese wanted in. To protect this golden goose, the VOC needed a supreme operating system. First, they mastered the hardware. The Dutch Fluid ship. Think of the Fluid as the Amazon Prime of 1600, pear-shaped to maximize cargo, with advanced rigging that required only a third of the crew of British ships, minimum overhead, maximum payload. But their ultimate weapon was the software, double-entry bookkeeping. For the first time, global trade was quantified. Everything, bribes to Asian lords, the cost of gunpowder, the lives of sailors dying from scurvy, was stripped of its humanity and turned into cold data, debits, and credits. The VOC processed the world into a balance sheet. And when you turn the world into data, morality becomes irrelevant. But a ledger does not pull the trigger. To execute a system this ruthless, you need a manager just as ruthless. A CEO willing to look at the balance sheet and decide that human lives are cheaper than spices. That man was Jan Pieterszoon Coen, the Governor General of the VOC, the sociopath in a suit. Coen believed in a brutal corporate synergy. No trade without war. No war without trade. In 1621, the natives of Banda committed the ultimate corporate sin. They sold nutmeg to the English. Coen did not sue them for breach of contract. He invaded. In a matter of months, Coen slaughtered, tortured, and enslaved the entire population. 14,000 people reduced to fewer than 1,000. But here is the cynical genius of the VOC. To the merchants in Amsterdam. This was not a genocide. This was not a crime against humanity. On the VOC's double-entry ledgers, the slaughter of the Banda Islands was simply recorded as a market stabilization cost. They successfully eliminated the competition, secured a 100% global monopoly, and the stock price skyrocketed. The VOC proved that violence was the most efficient business model on Earth. By the late 18th century, the VOC collapsed under its own weight. It turns out, running a global war machine is expensive. Corruption rotted the company from the inside out. In 1799, bankrupt and obsolete, the VOC was nationalized. The history books tell you the VOC died. The Dutch Golden Age ended. But they are wrong. A company is just paperwork. An idea, however, is immortal. Before the VOC even collapsed, Its financial DNA had already infected the world. Decades before the British became the global superpower, Dutch ships had already crossed the Atlantic. In 1624, they founded a tiny trading outpost at the southern tip of Manhattan. They called it New Amsterdam. It was not just a colony, it was a financial laboratory. The Dutch imported their exact operating system, the credit markets, the legal structures, and the corporate mentality. They even built a literal wooden wall to protect their assets from the British and Native Americans. In 1664, the British took over and renamed the city New York, but they could not wipe the city clean. They kept the Dutch financial habits because they worked. That wooden wall? It eventually became a paved road. Today, we know it as Wall Street. The very foundation of modern American capitalism was poured by Dutch merchants. And it was not just America. When the British East India Company finally overtook the VOC, it was only because the British copied the Dutch homework. They adopted the joint stock model, the government bonds, and the public debt system. The British won the war, but they did it using the Dutch financial blueprint. And the bloodline never broke back home either. Look closely at the Netherlands today. It is no longer a seafaring empire. It is a financial fortress. In 1907, the Royal Dutch Petroleum Company merged with Shell. Today, we know it as Royal Dutch Shell, an energy titan, and who holds the royal stake? The House of Orange. They traded spices for oil, wooden ships for tankers. But the mechanism of power remains exactly the same. Today, megacorporations do not need private armies of 10,000 soldiers. That is inefficient. They have lobbyists, they have offshore accounts, they write the tax codes that govern us. They still privatize the profits and socialize the risks. We look at Apple, BlackRock, or Amazon, and we debate whether they are too powerful. But 400 years ago, 17 men in Amsterdam already answered that question. The monster did not die. It just changed its name and bought a nicer suit. So, the next time you look at the stock market, ask yourself, if corporations now hold the power once reserved for kings, who actually wears the crown?